The cult of Mithra, the intercessor between man and the Persian divine power Ormuzd, was once an extremely widespread one, for it is the original cult of the sun. From its origins in Persia, the faith spread to Babylonia, Greece, and finally the Roman Empire, where it struggled against Christianity at the latter's inception. Christianity believes that it won with the decline of the material virtues of the Romans, but there are people who worship the solar deity today, and even London has its Mithra temple. Mithra was said to give his worshippers success in this world, as well as security and happiness in the next. Sound familiar, Freemasons? He was originally a genie, the worldly representative of the invisible power which ruled the affairs of men. Later, and the cult probably has a history of over 6,000 years, he became thought of by his devotees as being not just one of the 28 genii, but the only one which mattered, and the only one who could cater for the wishes and needs of the people. Thus it was that the ancient Aryan worship of Ahura Mazda, the Supreme Being, was displaced by that of one of his representatives. Now, one way, folks, you can tell who or which corporations or businesses or societies belong to these cults is to look at these names, such as Saturn, Mazda, etc. Ahura Mazda, the Supreme Being, was displaced by that of one of his representatives, although archaeological research has produced little to give a clear picture of the rituals and beliefs of the Mithraists. A considerable amount of secret lore still survives in the East, from India to Syria, which gives one a good idea of exactly how the members of the cult thought, and just exactly what their magical ceremonies were. 3 ritualistic objects are used by Mithrais: the crown, equivalent to the sun and power of the supernatural kind; the hammer or club, symbolizing creative activity of mankind; and the bull, which stands for nature, virility, increase. By the proper understanding of these objects, and just exactly what they represent, Mithrais have it that the ordinary man can transcend his environment, can become great or successful, or can achieve what he wants to do, and enters a delightful afterlife. What must he give in exchange? Nothing but worship to the principle which presides over all destiny and control to the priests of the religion. Now let's regress just a moment and let me explain to you why the bull. Throughout the ancient world, you see the symbology of the bull. Now, you have to remember this history goes back 6,000 years, the first 2,000 of which, looking back, is the Christian era. Now, remember, this is the age of Pisces, or the 2 fish. The 6,000-year period started in antiquity when the sun was in Taurus, or the bull. That is the meaning of Baal, or Baal. The golden calf was the representation of the house of the sun, or the age of the bull, or Taurus. It was really the same old mystery religion, the worship of the unseen God of the universe, represented by the sun, which over the centuries and the millennia has become the worship of the intellect, with the sun the representation of the light, or Lucifer, the one who gave man the gift of intellect. Now, after the age of Taurus came the goat, or the ram, and this was symbolized by the symbol of the goat, or the goat of Mendes. For in Mendes there was a temple erected to the worship of the mysteries, and since the sun was in the house of the goat or the ram, the object of the exoteric worship by the masses was the goat. When the sun passed into the house of Pisces, or the 2 fishes, the Christian era began. We are now on our way out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. Once you understand that the ancient religion was a religion of the worship of the heavens, then everything begins to come together. And when you understand that they ceased believing in an all-powerful, unseen God or hidden God of the universe, and became essentially pantheists, believing that everything is God, they call this nature or the natural way, then you can understand how man became to worship the intellect, and the symbol which used to represent the unseen God of the universe came to represent the intellect, the use of which will bring man to the state of apotheosis, where man himself will become God. And then you begin to look at all the things that are happening today, and you see their symbology everywhere. Nowhere will you see it more prominently than the Looney Tune fringe element which call themselves ufologists. You will see that everything to do with the so-called UFO phenomena comes right out of the mystery schools. One reason, folks, for the loss of importance of the cult of Mithras, undoubtedly, is the admission was restricted to those who were thought worthy to receive the blessings which would come through the proper beliefs and use of the magical powers presided over by the Mithra priests. Christianity, for instance, was open to a far greater section of the population, even although the Christian mysteries were not accessible everywhere to all until relatively late in our history. At the same time, some of the Mithraeus ceremonials were of such obvious emotional appeal that scholars are agreed that the purely ritualistic side of Christianity owes much to those of the sun god of the Persians. And if you've been listening to this program, you already know that Christianity was actually merged with the religion of the worship of the sun into what is now known as the Vatican. The lowest degree of initiation was known as the sacrament and could be administered to anyone, theoretically, who could be relied upon to keep a secret and who would eventually develop into a regular and devout worshiper. This degree was called that of the crow, and it symbolized, according to present-day Mithraeus, the death of the new member, from which he would arise reborn as a new man, and today the crow is known as the phoenix. This death, or symbolic death, spelt the end of his life as an unbeliever, and canceled his allegiance to former and unaccepted beliefs. The use of the word crow probably derives from the ancient Persian practice of exposing their dead to be eaten by carrion birds, which is still carried on by the Parsi community in India, who follow parts of ancient Iranian religion as supposedly taught by Zoroaster. But if the crow symbolized death, it was also the delegate privileged to take over the human body after death. Of course, this meant that in a sense it was superior to humanity. Thus it was that the members of the cult was superior to the ordinary run of mortals. They believed themselves to be a separate race of man, and still do. The candidate descended 7 steps into the temple, which was an underground one, fashioned in the shape of a cavern, and made to look as much as possible like a natural cave. Initiation tests now took place. The newcomer was pursued by wild beasts, priests in animal skins, demons, and all sorts of terrors. He had to fast for 3 days. In this debilitated, altered, and plastic state, he was given a lecture by a priest on the responsibilities which were now his. Among these, for the necessity to call brother only those who had been initiated. In the words of a Freemason today, whose son I happen to know, "If you are not one of us, you are nothing." Those words were spoken to his son when he asked his father why The Freemasons that he knew and his father were persecuting a local businessman and trying to drive him out of business. Now bear in mind that his son was not a Freemason. Let me say those words again for you folks. Quote, "If you are not one of us, you are nothing," unquote. All family ties were severed. Nothing mattered except doing one's job well and carrying out the worship of Mithra. The final ceremony took place amid the clash of cymbals, the beating of drums, and the unveiling of a statue of Mithra himself. This latter showed Mithra as a man carrying a bull by the hind legs. Now the symbolism of this piece of sculpture was explained to him. The bull, in addition to symbolizing fecundity, was representative of animal passion, and it was also the house in which the sun dwelt in the first 2,000 years of the religion. It was through invocations to Mithra that mankind first discovered how to overcome this force and how to discipline himself. Therefore, the secret of religion was partly that the worshipper must restrain himself physically in order to attain power over himself and over others. And this is the mystery of the Sphinx that man has been trying to decipher since man discovered the Sphinx in the modern world. It is simply this, that man is nothing but an animal with a brain, with an intellect. It is to remind us, folks, it is to tell us that no matter what you think or how high you get, you are still nothing but an animal with an intellect. Period. This graphic teaching of the diversion of sexual power into psychic channels shows that the Mithraists followed in essence the pattern of all mystery schools which believed in the production of power through discipline. In this they are clearly distinguished from the more primitive and less important orgiastic schools which merely practiced indiscriminate indulgence, mass immorality, and so on. The neophyte in this initiation then drank a little wine from the symbol to show that he realized that the symbol is the means whereby ritual ecstasy comes, which puts him in touch with the higher powers. Now, 2 long lines of initiates knelt on either side of the low stone benches which traversed the crypt. Remember, George Bush was initiated in the crypt or the tomb at Yale University into what is known as the Skull and Bones, the Russell Trust, the Brotherhood of Death. Now, remember, 2 lines of initiates knelt on either side of the low stone benches which traversed the crypt, and as the new member, accompanied by the priest who were initiated him, walked along the central aisle for the eating of the bread, a number of pieces of dried bread were placed on a drum, similar to those which were being softly beaten by one of the priests. The candidate ate one morsel, signifying that he accepted Mithra as the source of his food. This bread, according to their beliefs, had been exposed to the rays of the sun to absorb some of its quality, and thus the worshipper was partaking of the nature of the sun itself in this ritual observance. But it goes deeper than that, folks, because the sun is what enables all life to exist on this planet, being that the planet is at the perfect balance where it is neither too hot nor too cold, and that the planet is tilted upon its axis, creating the seasons which enable food to be grown in the more northern latitudes than if the earth was stable on an axis where only one portion of the globe always was in direct alignment with the sun. Then it would be too hot at the equator. There would be one narrow band in the northern and southern hemisphere where crops could be grown, and it would be too cold in the northern and southern hemispheres. So this ritual observance has scientific fact behind it, in that the bread indeed did come from the sun. And now the initiate was taught the password of the cult, which was to identify him to other members, and which he was to repeat to himself frequently in order to maintain the thought always in his mind. Quote, "I have eaten from the drum and drunk from the symbol, and I have learned the secret of religion," unquote. This is the cryptic phrase which an early Christian writer, Maternus, reports as being taught to the Mithraeus, quote, by a demon, unquote. The second degree of initiation was called the secret, and during this the candidate was brought to a state of ecstasy, in which he was somehow made to believe that he had seen the statue of the god actually endowed with life. Folks, it's not likely that there was any mechanical method by which this was done, because no such apparatus has been found in Mithraic temples unearthed. The candidate was brought up to the idol, to which he offered a loaf of bread and a cup of water. And this was to signify that he was a servant of the god, and that, quote, by what sustains my life, I offer my entire life to your service, unquote. The grade of soldier may show that the military arts were responsible for a good deal of the power of Mithra worship in ancient Persia. Certain it is, in any case, that this degree greatly appealed to the Roman warriors, who formed a very large part of the rank and file of the cult during its western expansion. A sign similar to a cross, signifying the sun, was made on the forehead of the initiate, who was thus marked as owned by the deity. A crown was placed before him, hanging from the point of a sword. This he took and placed it aside with the words, Mithra alone is my crown. And this, folks, this takes place in every mystery that there have ever been. Remember when Christ went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and was tempted by Satan? Satan offered him the crowns of any or all of the nations of the earth if he would just follow him, and Christ rejected it. The same thing happens in the mystery school. The initiate is always offered a crown, sometimes by the king or the emperor himself. And if he accepts the crown, he's considered unworthy, and being, as it would be interpreted as a threat to the real wearer of the crown, probably would have been executed. He was considered only worthy if he rejected the crown, symbolic of the ruler, the ruling of the nation or people or area. The Persian crown, it should be remembered, from which pattern all present-day crowns are eventually derived, is a golden sun disk with a hole in the center for the head. It is jagged at the edges, representing the sun's rays, just like that worn by the Statue of Liberty. And these projections are turned up to make what is still known in Western heraldry as the Oriental crown. You can also see this representation as the halo in Christian art. Now the candidate has to prove himself in a mock combat with soldiers and animals in a number of caves. When the Emperor Commodus went through this degree of initiation, he actually killed one of the participants, although he was supposed only to make a symbolic slaying. Passed through the soldier degree, the Mithraeus was eligible, after a lapse of time, to be promoted to the rank of lion. He was taken again to the cavern, and honey was smeared upon his brow, as opposed to the water which had been used in his acceptance into the earlier degree, his baptism. The degree of lion was taken only by those who had decided to dedicate themselves completely to the cult, and who would henceforth have no truck with the ordinary world. The lion was, then, a sort of priest, but rather more of a monk. He was trained in the rites of the cult and told certain secrets. The degree of lion of Mithras could only be conferred when the sun was occupying the zodiacal sign of Leo, and that's about July 21st to August 20th, during the Persian month of Asad, the lion. Now, there's a good deal of astrological lore in Mithraism, and also an admixture with Kabbalistic numerology. The Greek branch of the Mithraeus, for example, worked out that the numerical equivalent of the name, spelt by them Mithras, was 365, and thus corresponded to the number of days in the solar year. Well, since the deity was the sun, then this is exactly what it should have been. In the purely magical sense, Mithraism has it that both the name of the god and the rank which the individual holds in the cult have magical power. Thus, if a person wants to achieve anything, he has to concentrate upon the word Mithra, while preparing for himself the ceremonial repast and beating alternately a drum and cymbals. That the effect of initiation was to produce someone of upright character is amply evidenced by literature of the Roman times, in which the Mithraists were generally considered to be thoroughly trustworthy and improved people. Even their enemies could reproach their own followers with the vitality of the Mithraist creed. Tertullian, in his De Corona, which is Latin for the crown, which he composed in the 3rd Christian century, upbraids the Christians, inviting their attention to the Mithraists as examples. De Corona actually means the crown of thorns. You, his fellow warriors, should blush when exposed by any soldier of Mithra. When he is enrolled in the cave, he is offered the crown which he spurns, and he takes his oath upon this moment, and is to be believed. Through the fidelity of his servants, the devil puts us to shame, he said. Now there were 7 degrees of initiation in all, although there are some branches of the ecstatic side of the lore, which includes certain others, making the total 12. After Lion came the Persian, then the runner of the sun, then father, and finally father of fathers. The 12th degree, it is said, is king of kings, and where have we heard that before? And properly, this can be held only by the supreme king, and preferably the Shah-Hinshah, or the king of kings of Persia. This very ancient cult, from which more than one present-day secret society is derived, is thus seen to contain many of the elements which underlie organizations of this sort. You see, folks, it is a training system. It attempts to produce in its members a real or imagined experience of contact with some supreme power. The magical element is there too, shown in the belief in the power of certain names to achieve things which cannot be done by men. Mithraism was not an anti-social society in the sense that it did not conflict in its aims with the objectives of the countries in which it flourished, and hence it did not threaten the established order. It was tolerant of other creeds, just like Freemasonry is now. You can belong to any religion and join at the lowest level. But I guarantee you, when you reach the highest, you will belong to only one religion. The tolerance of other creeds meant that it did not attempt to supplant them. Its greatest festival, the birth of the sun, on the 25th of December, became Christianized, and it is claimed by those who still believe in its mysteries and celebrate them that Christianity did not so much supplant Mithraism as absorb it, accepting some of its externals and diverting them to its own use, and that is exactly what has happened. Perhaps incongruously, a present-day follower of Mithra in England recently likened this phenomenon to the eclipse of the Liberal Party. Quote, "Because the 2 other parties have taken over its objectives and widened the basis, only the actual initiates of Mithra know what has been lost in the process." Unquote. So the young man in the Phrygian bonnet, sometimes seen as the conqueror of the bull, or even as a man with a lion's head, still has his devotees. And folks, the sun still shines. So what has all this got to do with stars and stardust? Many people believe that Venus is the morning star. In the ancient days, they say that it was Sirius that rose just before the sun with a red cast to it and then turned a brilliant white as it rose up into the heavens. Well, folks, if you really think about it, the sun is the morning star. Good night, and God bless each and every one of you.